My son looked me in the eye, his voice sharp enough to cut through 40 years of silence. "You need to get out of my life, Dad. You contribute nothing valuable anymore." The words hung in the air of the living room I built with my hands, the same hands that carved the beams, sanded the floors, and paid every mortgage. Ethan stood there, immaculate in his tailored suit next to his fiancée, Claire, both staring at me like I was an old piece of furniture ready to be discarded. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just nodded once, turned off the lamp, and walked upstairs. Because when a man tells you to get out of his life, you have two choices: leave quietly or take your life back, and his too. I chose the second. The house was quiet after that, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. Outside Beacon Hill's cobblestone street shimmered under the drizzle, and I could hear the hum of city traffic mixing with my own heartbeat. I walked past the framed sketches of furniture designs, past the empty hall, where Ethan's childhood photos used to hang before he took them down last year. Claire's laughter drifted from downstairs, that high, polite sound that never quite reached her eyes. I sat at the edge of my bed, still wearing my work apron from the shop, and realized I hadn't felt this kind of calm in years. The kind that comes right before you do something irreversible. It hadn't always been like this. Once Ethan followed me everywhere, a boy with sawdust in his hair, asking how to hold a chisel, how to tell walnut from mahogany. He'd fall asleep on a pile of wood shavings while I worked late in the DeLuca & Sons workshop. He used to call the smell of varnish home. Somewhere between high school and Harvard, that smell must have turned sour. He traded sawdust for spreadsheets and his old man for a career that spoke in numbers and quarterly returns. I remember the day he told me he was moving back home. "Just temporary, Dad," he said, "until I get the downtown condo sorted." That was 3 years ago. Since then, he's treated this house like his portfolio. Something to manage, to optimize, to control. The handmade tables replaced by glass and chrome, the family crucifix boxed away because it doesn't fit the aesthetic. I went along with it, telling myself it was just a phase that he'd come around. But tonight, when he looked at me like I was a burden, I knew that the boy I raised was gone. I walked down to the basement workshop. The air smelled of cedar and oil, thick and familiar. My tools were still lined up the way they always had been, square, precise, loyal. I ran my hand over the old workbench, the grooves carved by decades of labor. Beneath a stack of sandpaper lay the wooden mallet I'd made when Ethan was 8. The handle was engraved, "For Ethan, 1998. The letters had faded, but the promise hadn't. I held it for a long time before setting it down gently. "You said I don't contribute?" I whispered, my voice low. "Let's see how much I've really contributed." Upstairs, I could hear them talking. Claire's voice, soft, clipped, judgmental. "He shouldn't still be here, Ethan. It's not healthy for you." And Ethan agreeing like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "I know. I just need to find the right time to tell him." The right time had arrived. They just didn't know it yet. I opened the small safe behind the old drafting board. Inside were folders I hadn't touched in years, property deeds, retirement accounts, the original incorporation papers for DeLuca & Sons custom furniture now dissolved. My father's signature was still on the earliest document, a shaky scrawl from 1963. He came to America with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. He taught me that a man's worth isn't measured in money, but in what he builds. I thought I'd pass that lesson on. I was wrong. I booted up my laptop, the one Ethan always said was ancient. Maybe so, but it still worked fine. I opened my bank portal. Every account, every investment, every joint fund Ethan had persuaded me to let him manage. The balances blinked back at me, proof of a lifetime's work. He thought because his name sat next to mine, it meant ownership. But ownership is about sweat, not signatures. Midnight passed. I could hear the rain tapping the window panes, steady and patient. I began making a list on a yellow pad: Heritage Bank mortgage value, East Coast Mutual Retirement, Fidelity Joint Investments, and at the bottom, in capital letters, close everything in his name. Not out of spite, but principle. A lesson in reality. Family revenge story, maybe. But not the kind with shouting or fists. This would be revenge without violence, built with the same precision I once gave to dovetail joints. At 1:00 a.m., I made coffee. Old habit. I drank it black, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the kitchen window. The man looking back at me was older, yes, but not beaten. Just done pretending. The kettle's whistle was soft, almost like a sigh. I thought of my wife Maria, gone 10 years now. She would have hated seeing what Ethan had become, or maybe she would have found a way to reach him. She always could soften what I couldn't. Teach him gently, Michael, she used to say. Don't break what you can still mend. I wish she'd been here to see that he'd already broken it himself. I turned off the lights and walked through the house one last time that night. Every room told a story. The dining table I built from reclaimed oak, now buried under Claire's designer books. The mantel where Maria's photo used to rest, replaced with a digital frame looping Ethan's vacation photos from Greece. Even the clock on the wall ticked differently now, soulless, battery run without rhythm. It struck me that I'd spent decades building this home for my family, only to realize I was the guest now. I paused at Ethan's office door. Light from his monitor flickered through the crack. I could hear his voice on a late-night call, probably with a client. Confident, smooth, the same tone he'd used when he told me to get out. I considered walking in, telling him what I thought of his arrogance, his blindness. But words had lost their power between us. Silence would speak louder. When I went back to my room, the clock read 2:17 a.m. The list was still on my desk, the ink dried into certainty. Tomorrow I'd visit the bank, then the lawyer, then the real estate agent. I'd take back my name, my house, my peace. Ethan had told me to get out of his life, but he'd soon learn that you can't erase the man who built your foundation. Not without feeling the collapse. I slipped the folded list into my wallet next to a photograph of Ethan as a child, grinning, missing a front tooth, holding up a crooked wooden birdhouse. For a moment, I almost tore the list apart. Almost. Then I remembered his words again. You contribute nothing valuable. The sentence replayed, echoing with every tick of the clock. By dawn, I was sitting in the kitchen, dressed, shoes polished, coat on. The first light of morning slid across the countertops, catching the edge of the stainless steel sink that had replaced my old copper one. I poured another cup of coffee and waited. Upstairs, Ethan stirred. The shower ran. His phone buzzed with morning emails. I could almost hear the gears of his perfect life turning. He came downstairs, surprised to see me awake. "You're up early," he said, reaching for the fridge. "Could you move? I need to grab my protein shake." His tone was casual, dismissive, like last night never happened. I stepped aside, calm. "You won't need that today," I said. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I smiled, faintly, folding my newspaper. "Nothing. Just thinking about making some changes." He shrugged, already half distracted, scrolling through his phone. I watched him leave for work, the front door closing behind him, the sound echoing through the empty house. When the silence returned, it felt complete, final. Tomorrow I thought he'll wake up to the sound of nothing. No coffee, no power, no father. Just silence. That's how lessons begin. The workshop still smelled of cedar and oil. When Michael stepped inside, the scent hit him like memory itself. Dust motes drifted through the air, caught in a narrow beam of light slicing through the old window. On the workbench lay a piece of walnut, half carved into what might have been a chair leg, the edges smooth and worn. His hand brushed across the groove he'd etched decades ago, M+E, 1994. Michael and Ethan. He closed his eyes. "It used to be alive down here," he whispered. "Now it's just ghosts." He could still hear the rhythm of hammers from his childhood, the echo of his father's voice, teaching him how to measure, how to listen to the grain of wood. Giovanni De Luca had come from Naples in 1958 with a single wooden toolbox and a name that no one in Boston could pronounce properly. He built tables, doors, and chairs for people who looked at him like he was part of the furniture. But he never let it break him. "In America, we don't just build furniture," son Giovanni would say. "We build our names." Michael grew up in the North End among the smell of espresso, the shouting of street vendors, the language of hands and sawdust. He learned that pride was not arrogance, it was endurance. He carried that lesson into manhood, determined that the name De Luca would never disappear. When he opened his first shop in 1979, he painted the words De Luca & Sons Custom Furniture on the front glass with his own brush. The gold paint shimmered against the morning light, and he remembered thinking it looked like a promise. Back then, the shop was tiny, 1 room, 2 saws, a coffee pot, and Maria, his wife, bringing him sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. She laughed at the way he kissed each finished table like it was a child. "You'll have sawdust in your veins," she'd tease. And when Ethan was born, she said, "Now it's De Luca & Sons for real." Michael would set the baby on a pile of soft fabric near his bench, working while the boy slept to the hum of the machines. Sometimes when he stopped for coffee, Maria would whisper, "He'll grow up with the smell of oak in his hair." The years rolled forward with the rhythm of labor. Michael's hands built more than furniture. They built a reputation. By the time Ethan could walk, the boy was already tracing the edges of wood with his small fingers. At 7, he made his first crooked birdhouse. At 9, he insisted on carving a letter E into the base of every stool his father made that summer. Michael didn't correct him. "This is our story," he told his son, written in wood. When business picked up in the late 80s, Michael expanded the workshop. He hired local apprentices, taught them how to cut straight, how to treat each piece of wood like a living thing. "Measure twice cut." Once he would say the same words Giovanni had told him. The De Luca name began to mean something in Boston: old-world craftsmanship, reliability, integrity. There were good years, weddings, birthdays, late-night dinners with family crowded around a table he had made himself. Ethan used to sit beside him in the shop legs, swinging, asking endless questions. Michael believed those moments would last forever, but forever rarely lasts. By 2008, the economy had turned. Orders slowed, bills grew, and Michael refused to lay off his men. He sold the company truck to make payroll and mortgaged the house to keep the doors open. "You can't save everyone," Maria told him gently. "Let it rest." But he couldn't. Work was all he knew. Ethan then, in his last year at Harvard, came home one weekend and watched his father sanding a table that would sell for less than the wood cost. "Dad," he said carefully, "you're wasting money on a dying trade. People buy factory furniture now. You can't compete with machines." Michael didn't answer. He kept sanding slow, deliberate strokes. When he looked up, his palms were bleeding where the sandpaper had rubbed through the calluses. "A machine can't bless a table before it's sold," he said quietly. Ethan shook his head, muttering, "You don't understand business." That night, Michael sat alone in the workshop, staring at the sawdust collecting under the lights. For the first time, he wondered if Ethan was right. He wasn't angry, only afraid that the son he'd built this life for was already too far from it. When Maria passed away in 2015, something in the workshop dimmed. He tried to keep it alive, taught a few classes at the community college, restored antique cabinets, but the silence grew heavier each year. In 2019, at 63, he finally sold the shop. A young developer wanted the property for a cafe and offered a good price. "You can rest now," his lawyer said. But when Michael walked out with the final check, he felt hollow. Rest wasn't what he wanted. Ethan came to him with promises. "Dad, you should invest that money into the house. Renovate it." Make it modern. It'll increase the value. The words sounded reasonable. Michael nodded. They redid the kitchen, the floors, even the garden. Nearly $500,000 gone in improvements, Ethan chose. When the work finished, Ethan looked around and said, "Finally looks like a place I can bring clients to. No thank you. No pride. Just satisfaction." The next week, the old shop sign arrived from storage. Michael leaned it against the living room wall. The letters DeLuca and Sons had faded, the paint chipped at the edges. "Where should we hang it?" he asked. Ethan barely looked up from his laptop. "It doesn't fit the aesthetic. Maybe keep it in the basement." And so the sign went down the stairs, along with the family photos, the crucifix from the hallway, the wooden mallet Giovanni had brought from Naples. Every memory turned into clutter. The house that once smelled of home now smelled like glass cleaner and imported candles. Michael moved quietly around it like a ghost in a museum built to forget him. Still, he tried. On Sundays, he cooked the old meals, hand-rolled gnocchi, slow tomato sauce with basil from his garden. Ethan would glance at the clock, grab a protein shake, and rush off to brunches with clients. "We'll eat later," he'd say. Later never came. One evening, Michael carried dinner to the table, 2 plates steaming wine glasses filled. He waited. Hours passed. He ate alone. The next morning, he found the untouched plate still covered in plastic wrap. He tossed it out with the rest of the trash. It wasn't just the food or the silence. It was the steady erasure, the way Ethan replaced family heirlooms with stainless steel. How he corrected his name when clients called him Ethan DeLuca. "It's Ethan Luke," he'd say, easier to pronounce, more American. Michael heard it once at a dinner and felt the air leave his chest. The boy who once asked about Naples now denied its existence. The transformation was complete when he noticed the house listing draft on Ethan's computer. "Thinking about selling?" he asked. Ethan shrugged. "Eventually. Maybe rent it out. You'd be comfortable in a smaller place, right?" Michael said nothing. He walked down to the basement later that night and sat before the old sign, brushing the dust away with his sleeve. The gold letters still gleamed faintly under the dim light. DeLuca and Sons. He whispered the name, feeling it vibrate through the air. "He killed the name," he said softly, "but not the blood." He hung the sign back on the wall, right above his old workbench where it belonged. Then he stood there for a long time, listening to the creak of the house settling above him. It sounded almost like breathing. Tomorrow, he thought, he would start cleaning, not the dust, but the history his son had tried to erase. And once he was done, the house would remember who built it. The first sound that morning was the scrape of furniture being dragged across the floor. Michael came downstairs to find Ethan standing in the middle of the living room with a team of decorators. Rolls of canvas leaned against the wall boxes labeled West Elm, stacked high near the staircase. Claire was directing the movers, her voice brisk and polite, as if the house were a hotel being restyled. "We're going for a more modern feel," she said without looking at him. "Clean lines, light colors, minimalist energy." Ethan turned, beaming. "What do you think Dad timed to give the place a new look?" Michael watched a stranger remove the old family portrait from the wall, a painting of Maria holding baby Ethan on her lap. "And what do we do with that?" he asked. Claire glanced at Ethan. "Maybe the basement? It doesn't really fit the theme." Michael nodded slowly. "Clean lines. Empty hearts," he said under his breath. He stood aside as boxes of his life disappeared down the stairs. The crucifix from the hallway, Maria's porcelain vase, the carved mantelpiece clock he'd made on their 5th anniversary. All of it wrapped in bubble paper and carried away. Each thud down the steps felt like a heartbeat fading. By evening, the house looked like a magazine photo, gleaming surfaces, abstract art. Nothing personal. Ethan and Claire stood in the middle of the room, admiring it. "Much better," she said. "It feels spacious." Michael sat silently on the couch, hands folded. Spacious, he murmured. That's one word for it. The next day, Ethan invited colleagues from his firm for dinner. They arrived in suits and perfume, bringing laughter that didn't belong in the house. Michael offered to help, but Ethan waved him off. Just relax, Dad. We've got this. He retreated to the kitchen anyway, slicing bread, pouring wine, setting out plates. It felt good to do something useful, even if no one noticed. As he arranged the bottles, he overheard one of the guests in the dining room laugh and say, "Your chef is amazing, Ethan." "Oh, that's just my dad," Ethan replied, a casual chuckle in his voice. "He likes to help around." The sentence struck like a nail driven deep. Just my dad, not the craftsman who built every inch of the house, not the man who fed half of Boston with his hands. Just my dad. He carried the bread basket to the table anyway, smiling faintly, pretending he hadn't heard. The conversation moved on to mergers, Stock's new restaurants in the Seaport district. None of them mentioned the smell of sawdust or the texture of real wood or the pride of making something that lasts. Later that night, while clearing the dishes, Michael heard Ethan say quietly to his managing partner, "He doesn't really understand my world." Michael froze with a glass in his hand. For a long moment, he didn't breathe. Then he finished washing the plate, set it down, and went to the basement. The air downstairs was thick with dust. Boxes of memories surrounded him, the photo albums, Maria's sewing kit, Ethan's old school projects. He opened one box and found a small wooden horse, one of Ethan's childhood carvings. Its leg had snapped clean off. Michael sat at his bench, applied a thin line of glue, and clamped it gently until the pieces met again. He worked slowly like a surgeon repairing bone. When he finished, he placed the horse beside the faded DeLuca and Sons sign. "You may erase the name," he whispered, "but I'll restore what's broken." Days passed in uneasy silence. The house no longer smelled of food or polish, only of sterilized air. Ethan and Claire filled it with business dinners and networking brunches, guests who called Michael Mr. D, or simply ignored him. One evening, he walked upstairs to speak to Ethan. He stopped outside the office door when he heard voices inside. Ethan was on a video call with a real estate agent. "Once Dad moves out," Ethan was saying, "we could rent this place for at least $12,000 a month. The location's perfect." Michael's hand tightened around the doorframe. Claire's voice floated through the speakerphone. "It's smart, Ethan. He'll be comfortable somewhere smaller." He stepped back quietly before they noticed him. In the hallway mirror, he saw his reflection, an old man standing in a house that used to belong to him. "My house," he murmured. "My name. My work. And I'm the guest." That night, sleep wouldn't come. He lay awake hearing every creak of the house. Around 3 a.m., a memory surfaced, his father's voice low and steady. "A DeLuca never begs for respect. We build it." He rose, put on his slippers, and went down to the basement. The glow of the old lamp cast long shadows over the bench. He opened his notebook, the one he hadn't touched since selling the shop, and wrote 4 words across a clean page. "Take it all back." He closed the book, exhaled, and felt something inside him settle. The anger didn't burn hot. It cooled into resolve. The next morning, he brewed coffee before Ethan came downstairs. When his son appeared crisp in his suit and tie, Michael slid a cup toward him. "Fresh pot," he said. Ethan nodded, distracted. "Thanks, Dad." Busy day. He scrolled through his phone, answering messages, already half gone from the conversation. "Busy days make empty lives," Michael said quietly. But Ethan wasn't listening. When the door closed behind him, Michael looked around the empty kitchen. Every surface gleamed. Every cabinet door shut perfectly. There was nothing left of him here, except the quiet. He opened the cabinet under the sink and took out a small box labeled Documents. Inside lay the mortgage papers, insurance forms, and old property deeds. He spread them on the table, reading each line carefully. Ethan's name appeared beside his own on several accounts: joint ownership, joint savings, joint responsibility. He smiled without humor. Joint responsibility, he repeated. Let's see how responsible you really are, son. He spent the rest of the morning organizing files, marking contacts with sticky notes. Bank, lawyer, realtor. When he looked out the window at noon, the sun had turned the glass table into a mirror. His reflection stared back, calm, deliberate, older, but not defeated. That evening, Ethan and Claire hosted another dinner. The guests admired the minimalist decor, the imported wine, the expensive art. Michael stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes, listening. The laughter was practiced, the compliments rehearsed. At one point, Claire told the story of how they'd transformed an old family property into something truly modern. Michael smiled to himself. She wasn't wrong. They'd transformed it all right, into a stage set. He turned off the faucet, dried his hands, and went downstairs again. The DeLuca and Sons sign hung proudly above the workbench, its gold letters glowing faintly in the lamplight. He sat beneath it, pulled out his notebook, and wrote one more sentence beneath the first: start with silence. End with truth. The house above him was full of laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of false joy. Down here there was only the sound of his pen against paper. When the party ended and the lights dimmed, Michael remained at his bench. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, an hour, maybe two, before he finally closed the notebook and whispered into the quiet, "If he wants a house without ghosts, I'll give him one." Outside, the rain began to fall against the basement window. He could hear it tapping softly, steady as a heartbeat. The kind of sound a craftsman listens to when deciding where to place the first cut. Ethan appeared in the doorway of Michael's study one Thursday afternoon, his tone too casual to be innocent. "Dad, could you keep Sunday evening free? Claire's parents are coming over for dinner. It's kind of important." Michael looked up from the newspaper. "You want me to cook something special?" Ethan hesitated, adjusting his cufflinks. "Actually, we're having it catered. French cuisine. Claire thought it would make a good impression. Just try not to cook anything. The smell might clash with the food." The words fell softly but landed hard. Michael folded the paper and nodded once. "No homemade meal. Got it." Ethan smiled, relieved, and left. When the door closed, Michael stared at the quiet house. Sunday dinners had once been sacred, an unbroken ritual from his father to him. The smell of garlic, the clatter of pots, Maria humming while stirring the sauce. He walked into the kitchen that evening and opened a jar of imported pesto on the counter, its label reading Parisian Basil Blend. He turned it over in his hands, whispering, "Clean lines. Imported hearts." Then he placed it back on the shelf. Sunday arrived gray and wet. Michael was up early, chopping tomatoes, mincing garlic, ignoring his son's instructions. The smell of San Marzano tomatoes simmering filled the kitchen. He hummed an old Neapolitan song under his breath while rolling gnocchi by hand. The dough felt warm and alive under his palms. By noon, the kitchen was alive with color pots of sauce, trays of roasted sausage, fresh bread cooling on the counter. He poured a glass of wine and smiled faintly. "If they don't want it," he told the empty room, "the angels will." The front door opened. Claire entered first, her heels sharp against the tile. She stopped short when she saw the counter covered in flour and pots. "Mr. DeLuca," she said, her smile tight, "we really don't need all this. The caterers are on their way." Michael wiped his hands on a towel. "Just a small Sunday gravy. Tradition." "Minimalism fits the mood better tonight," Claire said, glancing at Ethan for backup. Ethan sighed. "Dad, please, let's not make a scene." Michael nodded and turned off the stove. "Minimal food, minimal soul," he said softly, carrying the pot to the sink. By 6, The house smelled of truffle oil and expensive butter. Waiters in black uniforms carried silver trays through the dining room. The table glowed with candles polished to perfection. Michael stood at the kitchen door, sleeves rolled up, pretending not to notice the distance between him and the laughter inside. When the doorbell rang, Ethan rushed forward. "They're here." The Monroes entered with the grace of people who had never carried groceries in their lives. William Monroe shook Ethan's hand firmly. Margaret gave Claire a kiss on the cheek. "What a lovely modern space," she said, scanning the living room. "So tasteful. So clean." Michael stepped forward, smiling politely. "Welcome. I'm Michael." Margaret blinked. "Oh, wonderful. You have help tonight." Ethan's smile faltered. He opened his mouth, but the pause was too long. Claire stepped in. "This is Ethan's father," she said quickly, the air thickening. Margaret's expression froze for a heartbeat before recovering. "Oh, well, what a pleasant surprise." Michael offered his hand. "I hope you enjoy your evening." She shook it, her grip light and cold. During dinner, Michael sat at the far end of the table, half in shadow. The French dishes arrived one by one, duck confit soufflé, tiny plates that looked like art installations. The Monroes praised everything with enthusiasm. William raised his glass. "To new beginnings and to our children's bright future." Ethan smiled, basking in the praise. "Thank you, sir. I've worked hard to get here." Michael's fork paused mid-air. He lowered it slowly. Margaret leaned forward. "Ethan tells us you've built your career from the ground up. Self-made men are a dying breed." Ethan laughed modestly. "I've always believed success should speak for itself." No mention of the man who had built the ground he stood on. No acknowledgement of sacrifice or history or blood. Michael looked down at his plate, the candlelight flickering against the rim. His hand trembled once before he stilled it. Later, between courses, he slipped away to the kitchen. The pots he'd used earlier were still there, cooling under the dim light. He lifted the lid from one steam rose, fragrant and rich. The sauce gleamed thick and red. He poured a small taste onto a spoon and smiled. He carried a small bowl to the dining room. "Forgive the interruption," he said quietly. "I thought you might like to try something from our family recipe. It's from Naples." Margaret brightened. "That sounds lovely." Before she could reach for it, Ethan's voice cut through the room. "Dad, not now. We're in the middle of dinner." The word stopped Michael mid-step. The room froze. Every candle seemed to dim at once. He set the bowl down gently. "Forgive me," he said. "I thought family was always welcome at the table." No one spoke. Claire stared at her plate. William cleared his throat. "That smells wonderful," he offered weakly, but the moment had already soured. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let's move on to dessert." Michael nodded and walked back to the kitchen. He poured the gravy into a container, sealed it, and placed it in the refrigerator. His hands didn't shake. His face was calm. But inside, something final had settled. After dinner, while the guests lingered over coffee, Michael washed the dishes. Through the doorway, he could hear laughter again, louder this time, false, nervous laughter. Margaret was saying something about charity galas, Ethan chiming in with business anecdotes. William asked, "So, Michael, you've retired from the furniture business?" Michael dried his hands. "Retired from the shop, yes, not from life." Ethan gave a tight laugh. "He keeps busy organizing old stuff. Sentimental projects." The laughter that followed was light but sharp. Michael looked up, meeting his son's eyes. "Sentimental," he said. "Yes. That's one word for remembering where you come from." He turned away before anyone could respond. When the Monroes left, Ethan followed them to the door, thanking them profusely. Claire lingered behind, cheeks pale. "You shouldn't have embarrassed him like that," she whispered. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I didn't embarrass him. He embarrassed me. She looked at him for a long moment. Are you sure you know which one of you did that? After they left, the house fell silent. Ethan stood in the hallway, shoulders tight. He glanced toward the kitchen, but his father was nowhere in sight. Upstairs, a light glowed under Michael's door. He sat at his desk, the room filled with the faint scent of sawdust from the old mallet he kept beside his papers. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small stack of documents, bank statements, deeds, old contracts. He laid them out neatly in a row. He didn't feel anger, only clarity. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed softly. Inside, the container of sauce waited untouched. Michael closed the last file, exhaled slowly, and whispered into the quiet. You erased my name from your mouth. Now I'll erase yours from my world. He stood, put on his coat, and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered faintly through the drizzle. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a thin, lonely sound against the night. He looked down at the guests' cars, pulling away their headlights, fading down the street. Enjoy your evening, he said to the glass. I have phone calls to make. He turned off the light and left the room in darkness. Upstairs, the faint outline of Maria's photo on the nightstand caught a slice of moonlight. For the first time in years, he reached for it, brushed the frame with his thumb, and smiled. Tomorrow, he murmured, everything changes. The morning after the dinner was quiet, too quiet. Michael woke before dawn, his head clear, his hands steady. The humiliation from the night before lingered, but it no longer burned. It had cooled into focus. He brewed coffee, black and strong, and sat at the kitchen table surrounded by files and papers. The house was still asleep. Outside, the streetlight flickered against the fog, and somewhere far away, a church bell tolled 6 times. He took out his old notebook and turned to the page where he'd written 4 words in his rough handwriting. Take it all back. Beneath it, he drew 3 lines and wrote 3 names in block letters. Patricia, Bank Robert, Lawyer Jennifer, Realtor. The plan looked small on paper, but he knew what it meant. Every detail would matter. Every signature would change the world his son thought he controlled. He sipped the coffee and whispered, anger fades. Strategy endures. By 8 o'clock, he was dressed in a dark coat and polished shoes. He left the house without a word, the sound of the door closing soft as a secret. His first stop was Heritage Bank on Tremont Street. The city was just waking up, delivery trucks rattling over cobblestones, a street vendor shouting about fresh bagels. Michael's breath fogged in the cold as he walked up the marble steps. Inside, the familiar smell of ink and paper greeted him. Patricia Williams, the account manager, looked up from her desk and smiled warmly. Mr. DeLuca, good to see you. It's been a while. How's retirement treating you? He smiled faintly. Educational. She gestured to the chair. What can I do for you today? I need to review my accounts, he said. All of them. Especially the ones with my son's name attached. Her expression changed, professional concern edging in. Of course. Give me a moment. She typed quickly, her screen reflecting in her glasses. Yes, I see here joint household accounts, a couple of investment portfolios, and the mortgage escrow. You're both listed as primary. Michael nodded slowly. Can we separate them? Patricia looked up. It's possible, but it'll cause some disruptions. Automatic payments, credit cards your son might notice. Michael folded his hands. That's the idea. She studied him for a beat, then smiled softly. You always were a man of precision. I'll have the paperwork ready within the hour. While she printed the forms, Michael looked around the bank lobby. Men in suits hurried by, checking their phones, chasing numbers. He thought of his father, Giovanni, counting cash by hand every night, trusting only what he could touch. Maybe I inherited that too, he thought. When Patricia returned, he signed where she pointed line after line, steady as a craftsman carving the first cut. When it was done, she extended her hand. "It'll be finalized by Monday. Everything in your name alone." "Thank you, Patricia," he said, "for your discretion." She nodded. "Always, Mr. DeLuca." He left the bank feeling lighter, as if the air had thinned around him. His next stop was a small law office on Beacon Street. Robert Klein, his old friend and attorney. The brass nameplate outside hadn't changed in 20 years. Inside, the place smelled of old leather and rain-damp paper. Klein looked up from a pile of files when Michael walked in. "Well, well," Klein said, standing to shake his hand. "If it isn't the master of mahogany himself. To what do I owe this pleasure?" Michael sat down. "I need your help, Robert. I'm changing the terms of ownership on the house, and I'm revoking the power of attorney my son's been using." Klein raised an eyebrow. "That's serious business. You're sure about this?" Michael leaned back. "He told me to get out of his life. I'm just honoring his wish." Klein studied him for a moment, then began gathering papers. "You always did know how to make a statement." "I'm not making one," Michael said quietly. "I'm making things right." For the next hour, they worked through documents. Deeds, financial authorizations, transfer statements. Klein explaining every clause while Michael listened carefully, signing only after reading each page twice. His father's old advice echoed in his mind. Measure twice, cut once. When they finished, Klein leaned back. "You understand, this means the house is entirely yours again. If you sell it, there's no legal obligation to inform Ethan before or after." "I understand," Michael said. Klein's gaze softened. "You know, some people call that revenge." Michael smiled faintly. "Then they've never built a table worth keeping. Sometimes you need to tear something apart to rebuild it stronger." He left the office with the documents neatly folded in his briefcase. Outside, the afternoon sun had broken through the clouds. He stopped for a moment, letting the light warm his face. His final stop was a small real estate office on the corner of Union Street. A brass bell rang as he entered. Jennifer Ruiz looked up from her desk, her eyes widening with surprise. "Mr. DeLuca. It's been ages. How's retirement?" He chuckled. "Not as restful as people think?" She gestured to the seat. "What can I do for you? I need to sell my house," he said, quietly. "Cash buyers only. No inspections, no contingencies. 30-day close." Jennifer's pen paused mid-air. "That's fast. And confidential, I assume?" "Yes," he said. "My son doesn't need to know until it's done." She didn't ask questions, only nodded. "I can make that happen. The market's strong and your property's in prime condition." Michael smiled without warmth. He made sure of that. By the time he left, the paperwork was underway, photos scheduled for the weekend. Jennifer promised to screen only serious buyers. "We'll handle everything through my office," she assured him. "Perfect," he said. As the evening shadows stretched across the city, Michael drove home along the Charles River. The skyline shimmered in the golden light reflections rippling across the water. He thought about the years spent building that house, the countless nights sanding floors, repairing pipes, cooking meals after long days at the shop. And now, with 3 signatures, he'd reclaimed it all. When he parked in the driveway, the sun had set. Ethan's car was already there. Inside, laughter spilled from the living room, Claire's voice bright and careless. They were watching a movie, wine glasses on the coffee table. "How were your errands, Dad?" Ethan asked, glancing up. "Productive," Michael said, hanging his coat. He poured himself a glass of water, ignoring the half-empty bottle of wine on the counter. Claire smiled politely. "We saved you some takeout." "No need," he said. "I already ate." He went upstairs, leaving them to their laughter. In his room, he laid the folder of signed documents on the desk. He opened his notebook again, crossing out the 3 names from the list. Next to each, he wrote a check mark. Bank, done. Lawyer, done. Realtor, done. Then he turned to a new page and wrote 2 weeks. Silence until then. He sat back and looked around the room. The furniture was plain, but the view from the window was perfect. The same streetlights he'd watched for 30 years, the same oak tree Maria once hung a swing on. Downstairs, he could hear Ethan and Claire laughing, a sound so easy it almost didn't belong to real life. He didn't resent them. He didn't envy them. He simply felt finished. At midnight, the house was quiet again. Michael poured a small glass of Chianti and sat at the kitchen table. He thought of his father and of Maria, of the life he'd built that had somehow become a burden to his own blood. He smiled faintly. 40 years of work, he whispered. He'll lose it in 1 week, and I won't have to raise my voice once. He took a sip, savoring the taste, dry, old, honest. When he finished, he rinsed the glass, turned off the light, and walked to the window. Outside, the city slept. The street was still the air crisp. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of traffic carried like the tide. He opened his wallet and slipped a note inside, a single line from his notebook torn out earlier that morning. Start with silence. End with truth. Then he looked out into the night and whispered, "The storm's not coming, son. It's already here." The house was still when Michael woke that Sunday. The early light pressed softly against the curtains, gray and silent. He sat up, already dressed, already certain. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed, and the clock ticked with the rhythm of a workshop saw. It was showing day. He brewed coffee, dark and bitter, and poured it into his old mug. The calendar on the wall caught his eye, Sunday, April 7th. Private viewings. He marked a small X next to the date, folded the pen back into his pocket, and exhaled. Ethan spends Sundays pretending he's free, he murmured. I spend mine making sure he will be. At 10 o'clock sharp, the sound of a car engine rolled up the driveway. Jennifer Ruiz stepped out professional in a gray coat and heels, clipboard in hand. She waved when she saw him. Morning, Mr. DeLuca, she said. We're ready, he replied, unlocking the front door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and silence. The kitchen gleamed, the living room immaculate. He'd spent the night cleaning every inch, not out of pride, but because he wanted the buyers to see what he had built, every corner, every grain of wood. Jennifer looked around approvingly. Beautiful space, she said. We've got 3 cash buyers lined up. No open house. Just quiet showings as you requested. Michael nodded. Good. Let's keep it that way. She flipped through her notes. They'll arrive between 11 and 4. You sure you don't want to be out while they look? He shook his head. No, I'll stay. I want to see the kind of people who think they can buy my life. By 11, the first car, a silver Tesla, pulled into the driveway. A young couple stepped out, their energy fast and bright. The man wore a watch that probably cost more than Michael's first truck. They introduced themselves as Alex and Brooke. We sold our startup last month, Alex said, smiling as if that explained everything. We love the modern design. Modern, Michael repeated, glancing at the sterile white walls. Yes, my son designed that. They followed Jennifer from room to room, murmuring approval. It's so clean, Brooke said. So minimalist. She paused at the framed certificates on the wall, Ethan's Harvard diploma, his financial awards, the glossy photographs of him shaking hands with executives. You must be proud, she said. Michael smiled without showing his teeth. I used to be. They laughed politely, assuming it was a joke. When they left, Jennifer turned to him. You handled that well. He poured another cup of coffee. That wasn't hard. They're just buyers, not thieves. They don't know what they're standing on. At 1:30, the next car arrived, a black BMW. A tall man in a navy suit stepped out, sunglasses glinting. "Daniel Price," he said, shaking Michael's hand. "I'm in finance." "Of course," Michael said. Daniel walked through the house slowly, assessing every detail like a balance sheet. "You've kept this property in perfect condition," he said. "You must have spent a fortune on renovations." "I did," Michael said evenly. "Every cent of it came from my retirement fund." Daniel nodded absently. "Well, I can see why. I'll offer it asking cash, no inspection. I like quick deals." Jennifer looked thrilled. Michael didn't blink. "We'll see," he said. The man left his card on the counter and departed as swiftly as he'd arrived. By 3 o'clock, the final showing began. A family pulled up in an old SUV, a couple in their 40s, with 2 teenage kids. They stepped inside with quiet wonder, their eyes taking in the high ceilings, the light, the warmth. The wife ran her hand over the wooden banister. "This feels handmade," she said softly. Michael smiled for the first time that day. "It is." The husband nodded, his voice genuine. "You can feel the history in this place. It's got soul." They asked few questions about price, more about the neighborhood, the schools, the garden. Their daughter paused at a framed photograph of Marie in the kitchen, the one Ethan hadn't gotten around to hiding. "She looks kind," the girl said. "She was," Michael replied. When they left, the air felt lighter. Jennifer turned to him, her face bright. "That last family loved it. They're serious. I'll have offers by tonight." By evening, her phone buzzed. 3 offers, she told him, all above asking. The tech couple offered 2.9, the banker 3 even, and the family offered 2.85. But want to close in 2 weeks. Michael didn't hesitate. "Take the family." Jennifer blinked. "They're offering less. Money's not the point," he said. "Timing is everything." She studied him for a moment and nodded. "All right, Mr. DeLuca. We'll start the paperwork." By the time she left, twilight had settled over the city. Michael sat alone in the living room, the house still spotless but strangely hollow. He looked around at the art Ethan had chosen, the sterile furniture, the smooth walls stripped of photographs, and thought, let them have it. Let it belong to someone who'll fill it with laughter again. At 7, Ethan and Claire came home from brunch, all smiles and exhaustion. Ethan kicked off his shoes, loosening his tie. "You're up late," he said, glancing at his father. "What did you do today?" "Errands," Michael said. Claire poured herself a glass of wine. "We were talking about your old workshop today," she said cheerfully. "Ethan thinks you should sell that property too, if you still have it. It's wasted space." Michael looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." Ethan laughed. "See? Even he's coming around." Michael nodded. "Maybe I am." When they disappeared upstairs, he turned off the lights and went to his desk. The contract from Jennifer was waiting in his email inbox, the sale agreement marked with a digital signature line. He read every word twice before signing. At midnight, he poured himself another coffee instead of wine. The bitterness grounded him. He opened his notebook again. Under the list of completed tasks, he added a final line, "Buyer confirmed." Closing date, April 21st. He stared at the date for a long time. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the house would no longer be his or Ethan's. The next morning, he drove to Providence, an hour south, where the air smelled of salt and history. He stopped in front of a modest brick building with a "for rent" sign in the window. Inside, a small apartment waited 2 rooms, sunlight through lace curtains, quiet. The landlord was an older woman with kind eyes. "You'll like it here," she said. "Peaceful. No traffic, no noise." "Peaceful sounds good," he replied. He signed the lease on the spot. When he returned to Boston that evening, the street was glowing with the warmth of streetlights. He parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a long moment, watching the house through the windshield. Inside, he could see shadows moving, Ethan and Claire laughing in front of the television. He didn't hate them. He didn't even pity them. They were just too young to understand the value of silence. He stepped out of the car and went inside. "Evening," he said softly. "Hey, Dad," Ethan called, half distracted. "We're ordering sushi. You want anything?" Michael smiled. "No, thanks." He walked past them into the kitchen, poured himself water, and looked around one last time. The place was spotless, cold, and expensive. Nothing of him remained here. He opened the fridge and saw the old containers of sauce he'd made 2 weeks ago still untouched. He took them out, opened the lid, and dumped them into the trash. When he turned off the kitchen light, the house went completely dark except for the faint glow of the TV in the living room. Upstairs, he placed the lease agreement for the Providence apartment next to his notebook and the deed. 3 pieces of paper perfectly aligned. He ran his hand across them as if smoothing out a final piece of wood, then whispered, 40 years of work. He'll lose it in 1 week, and I won't have to lift a finger. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window, steady and sure. He sat down by the window and watched the street blur beneath the drizzle. Tomorrow, he thought, would be the beginning of the end, and the quietest victory of his life. The house was gone before Ethan even knew it was for sale. On a cold Monday morning, Michael walked out the front door one last time. The sky above Boston was a dull silver, heavy with clouds, and the faint hum of early traffic drifted through the quiet street. The sold sign stood crooked on the lawn, the white paint of the fence still gleaming from the renovation Ethan had insisted on. He paused at the gate, turning to look at the windows. Behind them lay 40 years of life. Maria's laughter, Ethan's first steps, every nail he had hammered with his own hands. He whispered softly, "At least someone will love this house again." A moving van idled at the curb. The new owners, the same family who had touched the banister with reverence, were arriving later that afternoon. Michael left the keys in an envelope on the kitchen counter, beside a note that simply said, "Welcome home." He locked the door for the last time, felt the metal cool against his palm, and walked away without looking back. That afternoon, he drove to a small cafe near the river and pulled out his phone. One by one, he called the numbers, scribbled in his notebook, Naples, Bari, Rome. The international static buzzed softly before voices answered. "Marco," he said, smiling, as a familiar accent filled his ear. "It's your Uncle Michael." Uncle Marco laughed in disbelief. "Madonna, is it really you?" "We thought you forgot about us. I never forget family," Michael said. "Tell me, are you still cooking in that little restaurant by the docks? But business is slow," Marco admitted. "Too many tourists, not enough real Italians. How would you like a change?" Michael asked. "A big one." There was a long pause, then a laugh of pure surprise. "You mean America, I mean family," Michael replied. By evening, he had spoken to all 4 of them, Marco the chef, Julia the nurse, Lorenzo the engineer, and Sophia the art student. Their voices came through the crackling lines, uncertain at first, then filled with gratitude. Each one of them said yes before he'd even finished explaining. When he hung up the last call, the cafe was empty except for him and the hum of the espresso machine. He finished his coffee slowly, then opened his notebook again and wrote a single line. "Legacy doesn't end, it travels." The next morning, he met with David Chen, an immigration attorney recommended by a friend. The office smelled faintly of tea and new paper. David, a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a kind smile, listened carefully as Michael laid out his plan. "You're sponsoring 4 family members from Italy?" he asked. "That's right," Michael said. "They're good kids. Educated, hardworking, no records, no debt. I'll cover every expense." David nodded. It's not a small process, Mr. DeLuca. Visa petition sponsorship, affidavit settlement funds. You'll be responsible for them financially for several years. Michael leaned forward. I've spent my life building for people who didn't value it. This time I'll build for those who will. David studied him for a moment, then smiled. That's one of the better reasons I've heard. Let's make it happen. For hours they filled out forms, scanned documents, gathered evidence of income. Michael had brought every record, meticulously bank statements, property sale contracts, proof of ownership for his new apartment lease in Providence. The lawyer worked fast, impressed by how organized he was. You're an easy client, David said with a laugh. 40 years of running a business will do that, Michael replied. When he left the office, the spring air had begun to thaw the city. He bought a loaf of Italian bread from a nearby bakery, the smell reminding him of his mother's kitchen. He walked along the river, tearing off pieces and feeding the gulls as he went. For the first time in months, he didn't feel angry, just ready. 2 months later, on a bright June afternoon, he stood at the arrivals gate of Logan Airport holding 4 handmade signs. Marco DeLuca, Julia DeLuca, Lorenzo DeLuca, Sofia DeLuca. The ink had smudged a little from his nervous palms. The crowd spilled through customs in waves, suitcases rolling, families reuniting, languages blending into one endless hum. And then through the sliding glass doors, he saw them. Marco came first, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied back and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He spotted Michael and froze for half a second, before breaking into a grin. Zio, he shouted, dropping his bag and wrapping him in a hug so tight it made Michael laugh. Behind him came Julia, carrying her grandmother's worn leather rosary tears already in her eyes. I can't believe it, she said in her lilting accent. You really brought us here. Next was Lorenzo, barely in his 20s, his energy restless, his English perfect. Uncle Mike, he said, shaking his hand firmly. I studied everything about Boston before we came. And Michael asked, smiling. It's smaller than I thought. Lorenzo grinned, but maybe the heart's bigger. Finally came Sofia, 19, her backpack covered in paint smudges and museum stickers. She was shy, quiet, but her eyes glowed when she met his. Thank you for this, she said softly. Michael's throat tightened. Your family, he managed. That's all that matters. The drive back to Providence was filled with laughter and overlapping voices. They pointed out every landmark, the Charles River, Fenway Park, the skyline. Marco asked about American restaurants. Julia practiced English phrases from a small notebook. Lorenzo joked about becoming rich. And Sofia stared out the window, sketching in her pad. When they reached the small apartment building, the evening sun spilled gold across the street. The rooms were modest, but warm wood floors, a small kitchen, a view of the park. It's perfect, Julia said. Michael smiled. It's a start. That night they cooked together for the first time. Marco made carbonara with fresh eggs and pancetta. Michael grated the cheese. The others set the table. They talked about Naples, about family, about the way the air there smelled of the sea. When the plates were full and the candles lit, Michael raised his glass. To family, old and new, he said. To family, they echoed, glasses clinking. The laughter that followed filled the small apartment like sunlight. For the first time in years, Michael felt the noise of home again. After dinner, they sat around the table talking long into the night. Sofia showed her drawings, street scenes from Naples, portraits of people in cafes. Lorenzo pulled out blueprints for a tech startup he wanted to build to help immigrant artisans sell their work online. Julia talked about finding a nursing program in Boston. And Marco leaned back, smiling. I want to open a restaurant, he said. Not fancy, real food. The kind Nonna used to make. Michael looked around at them, his heart swelling. Then that's what we'll do, he said. We'll bring DeLuca back to life. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, he stepped outside onto the small balcony. The city was quiet lights blinking softly across the river. He took a deep breath, the air cool and clean. On the table beside him lay a photo of the 4 cousins freshly printed at the airport kiosk. He looked at it for a long time, then slid it into his wallet behind Maria's picture. "Legacy doesn't need walls," he whispered. "Just hands to carry it forward." Before going inside, he checked his phone. There was a message from Jennifer Ruiz, the realtor. "The new family loves the house. Also, your son stopped by today." He looked surprised. Michael smiled faintly. "He'll have to learn to live without walls," he murmured. Inside the apartment was filled with the sound of quiet breathing, the smell of basil and garlic still lingering in the air. He poured himself one last glass of wine and toasted the darkness. "The house is gone," he said softly, "but the story isn't." He looked toward the sleeping rooms of his new family and added, "Some roots grow deeper when you cut the tree." The old sign leaned against the wall of the new storefront, its gold letters faded, but still proud. DeLuca and Sons and Darmanst and Sons Est. 1979. Michael ran a cloth over it, polishing the edges until the faint shimmer returned. Marco watched from the doorway, paintbrush in hand, the smell of fresh plaster and sawdust filling the small space. "You really think people will come?" he asked. "They'll come," Michael said, his voice calm and certain. "Not for what we sell, but for what they feel when they walk in." The shop had once been a bakery on a narrow corner of Federal Hill, now reborn as something between a restaurant and a workshop. Michael had spent the past month fixing it with his own hands, refinishing the floors, building the tables, installing light fixtures that cast a warm golden glow. The cousins worked beside him every day. Lorenzo handled permits, Julia scrubbed walls, and Sophia painted a mural on the far side, a swirl of hands, kneading dough, hammering wood, passing down tools through generations. It was small, yes, but it was theirs. Opening day arrived on a cool September morning. The air smelled faintly of espresso and rain. Marco was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring tomato sauce that simmered slow and rich. "Taste this," he said, offering Michael a spoon. Michael took it, savoring the deep, familiar flavor of basil and garlic. "That's your grandmother's recipe," he said quietly. Almost Marco grinned. "I added a little smoked salt for the modern touch." Michael laughed. "She would have yelled at you for that." Maybe, Marco said, but she would have eaten it anyway. At noon, the first customers trickled in, locals curious about the new place. The smell drew them before the sign did. Marco greeted them with a loud benvenuti while Julia served water and bread. Sophia stood behind the counter, sketching each table on her pad. Michael moved among them quietly, tightening chair bolts, refilling glasses, making sure everything worked. The space filled quickly. Laughter rose, spoons clinked against plates, and the sound reminded him of the old restaurant on Columbus Avenue long ago, when Maria used to hum in the kitchen and Ethan used to sit by the counter doing homework. By evening, every table was full. The chatter echoed out onto the street. Someone took a photo of the glowing sign, and by midnight, it was already online with the caption, "DeLuca and Sons, authentic food, authentic soul." The next morning, they woke to a surprise. The line outside the door stretched halfway down the block. A food blogger had posted about them, calling the place a masterpiece of memory and flavor. Journalists came. Locals called it a return of the old Italian spirit to Providence. Uncle Mike Marco said, reading from his phone, "Listen to this, run by a 70-year-old craftsman who turned his loss into legacy." "That's you." Michael smiled faintly. "That's us." The days blurred into a rhythm: dawn prep, morning deliveries, lunch rush, laughter, cleanup. The cousins thrived in their roles. Julia enrolled in a nursing course at the university, but every night after class, she returned to help serve dessert. Lorenzo managed their growing social media page, connecting with suppliers, planning an expansion. Sophia's mural became a local attraction. People came just to take pictures with it. In quiet moments, Michael would sit at the counter watching them. They worked the way craftsmen should, hands, steady, hearts full. The sign above the door no longer looked old. It looked eternal. 2 weeks later, a journalist from the Providence Journal came for an interview. She was young, enthusiastic, her voice quick with curiosity. "Mr. DeLuca," she said, "what inspired you to start again at 70? Michael wiped his hands on a towel and thought for a moment. "Legacy," he said. "You don't stop building just because you've lost what you made. You start again with what you still have, your hands, your family, your name." The article ran the next day. Headline: DeLuca and Sons, the return of craftsmanship. The story spread fast. Local radio hosts talked about it. Old customers from Boston called to congratulate him. Someone posted an old photo of Michael's original workshop online, and it went viral under the tag, "Respect Your Roots." Across the city in a glass tower office, Ethan scrolled through the article on his phone. The photo showed his father smiling beside Marco, both holding wooden spoons like swords. The caption read, "A craftsman's pride never retires." He stared at it for a long time. His co-workers were gathered by the coffee machine whispering. One of them said, "Isn't that your dad?" The guy from the article, Ethan forced a laugh. "Yeah," he said, "guess he found a hobby." But that night, alone in his apartment, he watched the accompanying video customers laughing, Marco tossing pasta, Michael talking about family. The applause at the end sounded like thunder in his empty living room. Back in Providence, Michael had no idea his son was watching. He was too busy teaching Marco how to plane wood for new table legs. "Always run your hand along the grain," he said. "Wood tells you how it wants to be shaped. You just have to listen." Marco tried smiling when the surface smoothed under his palm. "Like people," he said. Michael chuckled. "Exactly like people." One evening after the last customer left, they sat around the counter sharing espresso and leftover tiramisu. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of sugar and coffee. Sophia showed Michael her latest drawing, a portrait of him at the workbench, eyes focused, hands steady. "It's not perfect," she said shyly. He studied it. "It's honest," he said. "That's better." She smiled, her eyes shining. Lorenzo leaned on the counter. "You ever miss Boston?" he asked. Michael thought about it. No, Boston was a house. This is a home. Julia raised her cup. "To home," she said. They toasted quietly, and for a moment the world outside didn't exist. 2 days later, an older man entered the restaurant near closing time. He wore a wool hat and carried a worn leather notebook. "I'm looking for Mr. DeLuca," he said. Michael stepped forward. "That's me." The man smiled. "Name's Donati. I used to review restaurants for the Globe back in the day. I wrote about your old place in Boston, called it A Treasure of North End. Thought I'd see if the legend still had his touch." Michael laughed, shaking his hand. "I hope I don't disappoint you." He didn't. Donati stayed 2 hours eating slowly, writing between bites. When he left, he said, "You haven't lost it. You found it again." 3 days later, his review appeared online. In a world obsessed with new DeLuca, reminds us that the old ways still feed the soul. The restaurant exploded. Customers doubled. Reporters came from Boston, from New York. Someone filmed a short feature titled, "The Hands That Never Stopped Building." That night, when the rush finally ended, Michael sat alone in the quiet dining room. The tables gleamed, the mural glowed, and the sound of laughter from the kitchen drifted softly through the door. He took a deep breath. He thought of Maria. He thought of his father. And he thought of Ethan, The boy who used to sit on the counter eating spoonfuls of sauce, the man who had turned shame into distance. He didn't hate him. He just wished he could remember what real pride felt like. He wrote one sentence in his notebook before turning out the lights: forgiveness waits for the right silence. Outside, the street was empty, the neon sign humming gently in the dark. The words DeLuca and Sons Reborn 2024 glowed against the brick wall. He looked up at it, his reflection faint in the window, and smiled. He didn't know it yet, but that reflection, calm, steady, proud, was about to echo all the way back to Boston. The office smelled of burnt coffee and anxiety. Ethan stepped out of the elevator, briefcase in hand, pretending not to notice the silence that followed him down the hallway. Two associates huddled by the copy machine phones, tilted just enough for him to see a familiar headline glowing across both screens. From Forgotten Father to Local Legend, the return of DeLuca and Sons. His stomach tightened. He forced a polite smile, murmured morning, and walked straight into his glass-walled office. The blinds were half open, sunlight slicing across his desk like an accusation. He set the briefcase down and unlocked his computer. The first thing on his browser was the same headline. There was a picture his father smiling, surrounded by those Italian cousins he barely remembered. The article quoted a line in bold: "Legacy isn't about wealth. It's about respect." The words burned. He leaned back, pinched the bridge of his nose, and laughed softly to himself. "Respect," he whispered. What a marketing trick. A soft knock interrupted him. Claire poked her head in, holding her phone. "You've seen it, right?" He nodded. "Yeah." She stepped inside. "It's everywhere. Your dad's story's trending on 3 platforms. Even the Herald reposted it. They called him a symbol of, I know what they called him." He snapped sharper than he meant. Claire blinked, lips parting, then closed them again. "I didn't mean..." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "No. I know. I just didn't expect it to blow up like this." Claire hesitated. "Why didn't you ever tell me he was a craftsman? That he owned restaurants? That he built furniture? Any of it?" Ethan looked at her blankly. "Because it's ancient history. Because it doesn't matter." She studied him for a moment, disappointment flickering behind her calm tone. "Seems like it matters to everyone else." When she left, he stayed staring at the screen, his reflection fractured by the glass of the monitor. The article had over 1 million shares. Beneath it, comments piled up. This man built a life from his bare hands. A real American story. His son must be proud. He scrolled faster, jaw tight. One comment stopped him cold. "Funny how the rich always forget who built their ladders." By noon, whispers had spread through the office. He overheard them in passing. "Did you know his dad's the guy from that restaurant story? Yeah. Apparently he sold his son's house to fund it." Wild, right? The phone rang. He picked up. "Ethan DeLuca." "Ethan, it's Morrison. Come to my office." His pulse jumped. Inside the senior partner's suite, the blinds were drawn. Morrison sat behind the desk, expression grave. "You've seen the stories, I assume?" Ethan nodded. "They've reached our clients. Some are asking questions about your ethics, about your family dispute, whatever that means. I don't need to tell you how bad this looks." Ethan straightened. "Sir, my father's situation has nothing to do with me. It's personal. Private. In this business, there's no such thing as private." Morrison said coolly. "The internet doesn't care about context. They care about narrative, and right now the narrative is that you're the ungrateful son of a working-class hero." Ethan swallowed. "I can handle it." Morrison leaned back. "You'd better. Because if this goes on, the board will have to consider disciplinary action. You represent us, and we represent image." When he returned to his office, his reflection in the window looked older. He loosened his tie, staring down at the city below. The streets looked smaller than he remembered, like a toy version of the life he'd built. That evening, Claire invited him to dinner with her parents. He didn't want to go, but he went anyway. The restaurant was one of those places that served bread on marble slabs and charged extra for butter. Margaret Monroe smiled when she saw him. "Ethan, how's business?" "Busy," he said. William lifted his glass. "We read about your father's restaurant." "Quite a story. Impressive, man." Ethan forced a chuckle. "He's resourceful." Margaret's tone softened. "You must be proud. It takes courage to start over at that age." "Pride isn't the word I'd use," he muttered before catching himself. Claire shot him a look. "Mom, let's talk about something else." But her mother didn't take the hint. "I just think it's beautiful, his commitment to family, his generosity. Sponsoring his relatives from Italy? That's incredible." Ethan felt the wine burn in his throat. "He likes grand gestures." William smiled politely. "Still, he's leaving quite a mark." "Reminds me of the American dream, doesn't it?" Ethan put down his fork. "If by dream you mean media spectacles, sure." The silence that followed was thick. Claire's eyes hardened, and Margaret exchanged a glance with her husband. The rest of the meal passed with forced conversation and clinking cutlery. When they got back to the apartment, Claire turned on the light and faced him. "What is wrong with you?" "Nothing," he said, taking off his jacket. "You can't even hear his name without sneering. You act like he ruined you, but the truth is, he gave you everything." He laughed bitterly. "He gave me a guilt trip, and apparently a PR crisis." "You think this is about your career," she said. "It's about character, Ethan. Everyone can see what he is, and now they're seeing what you are, too." He didn't answer. She grabbed her coat. "I'm staying at my parents' tonight." The door shut behind her. He sat on the couch, the city lights cutting through the blinds. The silence in the room felt heavier than noise. His phone buzzed a news alert. He opened it. DeLuca and Sons to expand craftsmanship revival draws national attention. A video played automatically. His father was speaking to a reporter outside the restaurant. "I didn't seek revenge," Michael said. "I sought peace. But peace looks a lot like justice to those who fear it." The reporter laughed softly. "So this success isn't about proving anything?" Michael smiled. "No. It's about remembering who I am." Ethan threw the phone onto the table. His chest hurt. For a long time, he just sat there staring at the reflection in the glass. The next few days blurred. Calls went unanswered. Clients postponed meetings. His assistant told him a major account had transferred to another lawyer. "They said it's about optics," she said, eyes apologetic. By Friday night, he was the last person in the office. Rain streaked the windows, city lights melting into the water below. He opened his laptop and typed his father's name into the search bar. Thousands of results appeared: photos, interviews, reviews. In one clip, Marco stood beside Michael, arms crossed proudly. "He gave us everything," Marco said. "We're building the future he believed in." The camera panned to the restaurant filled with customers. The mural of hands, the glow of light, the warmth. It looked like home. Ethan watched in silence. For the first time, he didn't feel anger. He felt absence. He thought about the boy who once sat in his father's workshop, the smell of wood shavings and varnish thick in the air. He remembered the steady rhythm of the hammer, his father's voice saying, "Measure twice, cut once." Now he sat in a sterile glass office built on words and numbers, and nothing he measured seemed to fit anymore. He opened his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. It rang once and twice. Then his father's name appeared on the screen. Michael was closing the restaurant when the call came. He looked at the phone at the name glowing against the dark. He didn't answer. He set it face down on the counter. The ringing stopped. The quiet returned. He He turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was calm, the sign above him glowing softly. DeLuca and Sons Reborn, 2024. He looked up at it then, toward the stars beyond the city haze. "Justice doesn't always make noise," he said quietly. "Sometimes silence hurts louder." Back in Boston, Ethan sat alone. The call ended, the city still humming outside his window. His reflection stared back at him, tired, small, unrecognizable. The next morning, the story of DeLuca's comeback reached 2 million views. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt what it was like to be the son of a man the world respected, but he had not. The ballroom glowed gold under the chandeliers, every crystal trembling with the music of champagne glasses and laughter. Ethan stood at the center of it all, his smile polished, his tuxedo flawless. The engagement gala was his masterpiece, every inch of the room designed to impress. The Boston skyline shimmered beyond the glass windows, a stage for his return to control. Claire moved through the crowd like she belonged to royalty. Her dress silver and soft, her laughter perfectly timed. Her parents mingled near the buffet, already boasting about the upcoming wedding. A celebration of legacy, Margaret Monroe called it. Ethan liked the word. Legacy. It sounded like something permanent. He tapped his glass with a silver fork. The hum of conversation faded. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice confident, rehearsed. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. This isn't just an engagement party, it's a new chapter. For me, for Claire, for our families. It's about what we build together, our own legacy." Applause filled the room. He smiled wider, scanning the crowd. And then, just for a second, his heart skipped. Near the entrance stood a figure he hadn't expected to see again, Michael. Dressed in a simple gray suit, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. Ethan's fingers tightened around the glass. Michael nodded once, as if greeting an equal, not a guest. He stepped inside, unhurried eyes moving across the glittering room. Conversation slowed. A few guests recognized him from the news stories. Claire turned pale. "Ethan," she whispered, "what is your father doing here?" "I didn't invite him," he said through clenched teeth. Margaret's smile faltered. "Well, this is unexpected." Before Ethan could move, Michael was already making his way through the crowd, polite nods and faint smiles disarming the whispers. When he reached the foot of the staircase, he stopped. "Evening, everyone," he said, his voice steady and low. "Don't let me interrupt. I just came to see what legacy looks like these days." The room froze. Ethan stepped forward, jaw tight. "Dad, this is not the time." Michael's eyes held his calmly. "You're right. Time's already up." Outside, the sound of a truck engine echoed through the evening air. It grew louder, then stopped right outside the Grand Hotel doors. Guests turned as the rumble of metal ramps dropped onto the pavement. A mover in a dark uniform stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Delivery for DeLuca," he announced. Ethan's face drained of color. There must be some mistake. Michael looked at the mover. "No mistake," he said. "Bring them in." The double doors opened. A team of movers began carrying in wooden crates labeled DeLuca and Sons Providence. Gasps rippled through the ballroom as they rolled across the marble floor, the elegant illusion of the evening cracking with every wheel. "What are you doing?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising. Michael smiled faintly. "Delivering truth." Claire's father stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps this isn't the place." But Michael continued calm as ever. "You see, my son once told his friends, his colleagues, and even this fine woman's family that I contributed nothing valuable to his life, that I was just the man who helped around the property. So tonight I thought I'd return the favor. I've brought everything valuable that was mine, so he can see what it looks like when I take it back." Gasps filled the air. Phones were already recording. Ethan's face turned red. "Stop this, now!" Michael turned to the guests. For years, I worked 16-hour days to build a life. This house he boasts about, these savings he spent, it was all made from my hands. But when I became an inconvenience to his image, he erased me, my history, our name. He looked at Ethan. You told me to get out of your life. I listened. Ethan moved closer, his voice trembling with anger. You can't humiliate me like this in front of everyone. Michael met his eyes, unflinching. I'm not humiliating you. I'm teaching you. Some lessons cost everything. From the corner of the room, the cousins appeared, Marco, Julia, Lorenzo, and Sophia. They entered quietly, each carrying something symbolic. A photo frame, a small handmade chair, a wooden box of tools. The crowd parted for them, the murmur of curiosity growing. This is my family, Michael said, gesturing to them. The ones who still remember where they came from. The ones who understand work, not just words. Marco stepped forward, his voice clear. Uncle Michael gave us a future when we had none. He gave us his savings, his trust, his name. Sophia lifted the photo of the mural from the restaurant wall. He didn't just build furniture, she said softly. He rebuilt dignity. The guests murmured, many nodding. Someone whispered, that's the restaurant from the paper. Michael faced Ethan again. The house is sold. Every cent went to their visas, their schooling, their dreams. Everything you thought was your inheritance gone. Ethan's breath hitched. You sold the house. Yes, Michael said simply. To buy something worth keeping. Margaret gasped. Claire covered her mouth. The whispers spread like wildfire. Ethan's voice cracked. That was my future. Michael stepped closer, his voice almost gentle. No, son, that was mine. You just lived in it. The silence that followed was so deep it rang. Claire backed away, shaking her head. Ethan, she said softly, did you really tell him he wasn't valuable? Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Her parents were already moving toward the exit. We'll discuss this later, Margaret said coldly. Michael turned to the guests. You all talk about legacy. Let me tell you what legacy really is. It's not marble floors or champagne galas. It's work that feeds people hands, that build names that survive shame. Then he looked at his son one last time. You wanted freedom from your father. Now you have it. Completely. He turned to the movers. Take the crates back to Providence. As they rolled out, the murmurs swelled into a quiet storm. Claire's father muttered something about scandal reporters, whispered cameras flashed. Ethan stood frozen, trembling, staring at the doorway his father had just walked through. Claire picked up the microphone from the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, she said softly, her voice breaking. The party is over. The guests began to leave in murmurs and hurried steps. Within minutes, the ballroom was nearly empty, just Ethan standing alone under the fading gold lights. Champagne glasses, half-full petals scattered across the floor, laughter replaced by the echo of shame. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his breath. From the window, he could see the moving truck driving away, the logo DeLuca and Sons glowing faintly in the rain. Claire turned back once before leaving. He didn't ruin you, Ethan. You did that yourself. Then she was gone. Michael walked out of the hotel into the night air. The rain had started again, soft and steady. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing, but he ignored them. He looked up at the dark sky, the city lights reflecting in puddles. A young journalist caught up to him, holding out a microphone. Mr. DeLuca, what do you call what you did tonight? Michael paused, smiled faintly. Balance, he said. You can't build a house on lies. Sometimes you have to take it down to show where the cracks began. He walked away, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles, each step deliberate and calm. Inside the ballroom, Ethan sank into a chair, his reflection fractured in the glass of a half-empty wine bottle. The faint hum of the city echoed outside, indifferent and endless. He whispered to no one. He won without raising his voice. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the marble steps clean. The morning after the gala smelled like champagne and shame. Ethan woke on the couch, still in his wrinkled tuxedo, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. The city outside moved on, as if nothing had happened. But inside, every surface of his apartment seemed to hum with what he'd lost. The silence was too clean. He sat up, head pounding the events of the night before, replaying in shards his father's voice, the gasps of the guests, the movers hauling out crates, Mark DeLuca and Sons. He closed his eyes and pressed his palms to his face. God, he whispered. What have I done? When his phone buzzed, he almost didn't check it, but the screen lit up with a dozen missed calls, his firm Claire unknown numbers. The last message was from his assistant. Mr. Morrison wants to see you first thing Monday. Urgent. He stood, his legs heavy, and went to the kitchen. The fridge was nearly empty except for bottled water and half a lemon. On the counter lay an unopened envelope, final notice from his mortgage bank. He stared at it without opening it. The house was gone, sold, paid off, erased. He had nothing left to pretend was his. By the time he arrived at Whitmore Financial that Monday, whispers filled the hallways like wind through broken glass. People looked up when he passed, eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and pity. He walked into Morrison's office without knocking. Morrison didn't offer him a seat. Ethan, he said, his tone clipped, the firm can't be associated with scandal. Clients are calling non-stop. They're citing the video from your engagement party. It's everywhere. Ethan kept his jaw tight. That video was taken out of context. Context doesn't matter. Optics do. Morrison's voice was calm but cold. We're asking you to step back from active cases until this dies down. Consider it unpaid leave. Ethan's mouth went dry. You're suspending me, I'm protecting the firm, Morrison said. And honestly, maybe you should take the time. Figure out what kind of man you want to be. Ethan wanted to argue, but no words came. He nodded once, turned, and walked out. In the hallway, people pretended to be busy, heads bowed over their screens. He heard one whisper, "That's him, the lawyer whose dad exposed him." He left the building into the drizzle. The wind hit his face, sharp as regret. That evening, he stood outside Claire's apartment, soaked through, holding a single flower, a white lily, her favorite. When she opened the door, her expression didn't change. I just want to talk, he said. She sighed softly. You should have wanted that before you lost everything. Please, he said, voice cracking. You saw what he did to me. She shook her head. No, Ethan. I saw what you did to him. He tried to speak, but she continued, her tone calm and devastating. You didn't just erase your father. You erased yourself. Everything that made you decent, everything that could have made you proud. She stepped back, the door still open, but her body telling him it was already closed. Go home. Fix yourself before you ask anyone to stay beside you. The door shut with finality. That night he sat in his empty apartment, surrounded by silence. He poured a glass of whiskey and didn't drink it. Instead, he opened his laptop and searched DeLuca and Sons' Providence. Photos filled the screen, his father standing with Marco and the others smiling in front of the restaurant's glowing sign. The headline read, Craftsmanship Lives Again. He clicked the video interview. The journalist asked Mr. DeLuca, what does success mean to you? Michael smiled. It means knowing what's enough and who you build for. Ethan closed the laptop and leaned back. His throat ached, his chest hollow. For the first time in his adult life, he felt small, not because someone else had made him so, but because he finally saw how little he had built himself. 2 days later, His email pinged with a message from the firm's HR department: termination effective immediately. He didn't read the rest. He just sat at the table, the word terminated burning through him like acid. Bills piled up. Calls went unanswered. His landlord left a note about rent. By the end of the week, he packed a single duffel bag, shut the lights off, and left the keys on the counter. He didn't know where he was going until he was already halfway down the highway toward Providence. The drive was long, the air heavy with spring fog. By the time he reached the city, dusk had settled. He parked across from the restaurant and sat there watching through the rain-streaked windshield. Inside the place was a live, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, laughter echoing the smell of garlic and wine drifting even through the car window. His father stood near the kitchen apron, dusted with flour, face calm and sure. People greeted him, shook his hand, treated him with the respect Ethan had always craved. He watched for nearly an hour before getting out of the car. The rain had stopped, leaving the street glistening. He walked slowly toward the door, but stopped short of the entrance. Through the glass, he saw a young couple dining near the window, the woman smiling as Marco set down their plates. It hit him then. The house he'd lost, the job, the fiancé, all of it felt weightless compared to the one thing he couldn't reclaim: belonging. He turned away before anyone saw him. Sitting on a nearby bench, he pulled a napkin from his pocket and started writing. Dad, you were right about everything. About pride, about work, about what lasts. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I remember now. I remember who you were before I decided to forget. He folded the napkin carefully, walked to the restaurant door, and slipped it under the mat. Then he walked back to his car and drove off into the quiet. Later that night, after closing, Sophia found the note. She handed it to Michael wordlessly. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable at first. Then his shoulders eased. He placed the napkin on the counter and traced the edge with one finger. He whispered, "Maybe the boy I raised isn't gone." Marco called from the back. "Uncle Mike, we need another bottle of Chianti." Michael smiled faintly. "Coming," he said. Before he went, he tore a corner off the napkin, the part that read, "I remember now." He slipped it into his wallet beside a faded photo of Ethan as a child holding a wooden toy horse. When the restaurant emptied and the lights dimmed, he stepped outside. The night was cool, the stars barely visible over the city's glow. He sat on the bench across the street where Ethan had been, not knowing it, and looked up at the sign, DeLuca and Sons Reborn 2024. He spoke softly, almost to himself. Revenge ends when the lesson is learned. Maybe we're finally getting there. He stood locking the door and began the slow walk home. Behind him, the street was quiet, the sign still glowing faintly in the window, as if the past itself refused to dim. The smell of roasted garlic and basil filled the air long before sunset. The sign outside glowed soft gold against the brick wall, DeLuca and Sons Sunday supper tonight. Inside, laughter and the sound of clinking glasses echoed across the room as Marco arranged plates of antipasto and Julia poured wine for a table of regulars. Sophia's new mural, freshly finished, stretched across the far wall, hands kneading dough, passing tools shaping wood, a story told in color and light. Michael moved slowly through the restaurant, steady and calm, wiping each table with the same care he'd given his first kitchen 40 years ago. When he reached the end of the room, he stopped at a table with one empty chair. He set a folded napkin beside it, just like always. Sophia noticed and smiled softly. "You still do that every week?" He nodded. "For whoever remembers." She didn't ask who. Some answers didn't need words. As the dinner rush began, the bell above the door jingled. Michael looked up and froze. There, standing in the doorway with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, was Ethan. The same tired eyes, but different somehow. The arrogance was gone. Evening, Ethan said quietly. Michael didn't move right away. You here to eat? Ethan gave a small nod. If you'll let me. Family eats together, Michael said. Grab a seat. Inside, the cousins exchanged cautious glances. Marco broke the tension with a grin. He'll need a plate, Uncle. A big one. Julia hurried to fill it spaghetti, meatballs, bread, everything she could carry. Eat, she said, sliding it toward Ethan. You look like someone who hasn't in days. Ethan laughed softly, awkward, but sincere. You might be right. He took a bite. For a long moment, the room was quiet except for the sound of silverware. Then he said, You kept the recipes. I kept what mattered, Michael replied. Not everything old needs fixing. Ethan looked down at his plate. I used to think success meant forgetting where I came from. I was wrong. Michael nodded slightly. Took me half a lifetime to learn the opposite lesson. Sometimes holding on too tight can break things too. Marco leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching them both. Looks like the kitchen's getting smaller, he said lightly. Maybe we should build a bigger table. Everyone laughed, and for the first time, Ethan did too. It wasn't forced. As the night went on, the customers left one by one, until only family remained. The cousins cleaned up while Michael sat across from his son, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clatter of dishes filling the silence. Ethan wiped his hands on a napkin, his voice steady but low. I came to say I'm sorry. For the house, for the name, for pretending I didn't need you. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not the lawyer who had shamed him, but the boy who used to run through his restaurant carrying loaves of bread like trophies. You don't owe me sorry, Michael said finally. You owe yourself better choices. Ethan's shoulders sagged. I lost everything, Dad. My job, Claire, my place. Michael leaned back thoughtful. You didn't lose anything worth keeping. You just lost the noise. Ethan gave a small laugh, half broken, half grateful. You always did know how to cut through the noise. Michael stood, went to the counter, and returned with a small plate of tiramisu. He set it in front of his son. Your mother's recipe. Try it. Ethan hesitated, then took a bite. His eyes softened instantly. It tastes like home. Good, Michael said. Then maybe you're ready to find it again. They sat quietly for a moment before Michael reached beneath the counter and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He set it between them and unfolded it, the small wooden horse Ethan had carved as a child. Its legs, uneven tail chipped, but still standing proud. You made this once, Michael said. I fixed it a long time ago. Ethan touched it carefully. You kept it all these years. I keep things worth saving. Ethan looked up. Can I come back? Help out here? Anything you need? Michael smiled faintly. You can start with the dishes. The cousins burst out laughing from the kitchen. We'll make room for him, Marco shouted. And just like that, the weight in the room lifted. The next morning, Ethan returned before sunrise. He put on an apron and helped Marco prep dough, following directions without pride or pretense. Julia teased him about his clumsy chopping. Sophia handed him sketches for a new menu logo, and Michael just watched from the doorway, the corners of his mouth turned up. By afternoon, customers were arriving early, drawn by the warmth that now filled every corner of the restaurant. Marco worked the stove, Julia managed to tables. Ethan carried plates with care, and Michael guided them all with the calm patience of a man who had nothing left to prove. As the day ended, Ethan stepped outside to hang a new sign above the door, freshly painted by Sophia. The gold lettering gleamed under the setting sun, DeLuca and Sons Reborn, 2024. He tightened the last bolt, then looked back through the window at the family moving together in rhythm. Michael joined him on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. Not bad, he said, looking up at the sign. Ethan smiled. Straight this time. Michael chuckled. Guess you finally learned how to measure twice. They stood side by side as the sky darkened the glow of the restaurant lighting their faces. Dad Ethan said softly, "Thank you for letting me back." Michael shook his head. "I didn't let you back. You walked in on your own. I just left the door open." Inside, Marco called out, "Hey, you two gonna stand there all night or help us clean up?" Michael looked at his son. "You heard him. Grab a towel." Ethan laughed, following him back inside. That night, the family gathered again for supper. The last table filled the plates steaming. Michael raised his glass. "To those who build," he said, "and those who learn to rebuild." Everyone cheered. Laughter filled the room again, rising and falling like music. Later, when the lights dimmed and the last customer left, Michael stepped outside one final time. The street was quiet, the air warm. He looked up at the sign, his name, his son's name, and smiled. He turned toward the camera, eyes kind and steady. "Family isn't about who shares your blood," he said softly. "It's about who stays at your table when there's nothing left to serve. Some lessons can't be bought, they have to be lived." He paused, the glow of the restaurant behind him, the sounds of laughter still drifting through the door. If this story reminded you of someone in your life, someone who taught you what legacy really means, tell me about them in the comments. And if you believe in stories where forgiveness feels like justice, stay with us. There are more stories to share and more hearts to rebuild. Subscribe and join the family, because here every table always has one seat waiting for you.